So thank you all for joining us for the first CTIPP CAN call of 2023. Still very strange to say 2023, and yet here we are, so we'll get used to it. Seems to be a normal recurrence year after year. But really excited for not just this call, but what we have going on in the year ahead. I'm going to keep this short and just say, like we talked about last month, how grateful we are for our expanding network and each of you. As you'll see during this call, this is going to be more involved. We really, I think that CTIPP has done a good job over the years of providing high quality, webinars and a lot of information, regarding multiple different improvements, innovations in the trauma-informed field. But internally, we've talked a lot about getting a lot more expertise and input from all of you, because we know that so many of you do incredible work, and all of your lived experiences in terms of advocacy and practice and your input into policy is so critical as we move forward. And we really want to engage in modeling the model as we move forward. And we know, a quote that comes to mind is nothing about us without us. And this is really a process that we need to do together. And so that's what we're trying to model in this call. And you'll see a lot more of that moving forward, engagement and hopefully implementation of your expertise, what you're able to uplift and teach us, integrated into our messaging, integrated into our work. And so you'll see some of that even in the way that we integrated what we learned from Iowa ACES 360 last month into some of the messaging around this call. And so we look forward to continuing, to integrate your wisdom and knowledge and continue to create a stronger network that will really help us move forward toward transformation as we move forward with this movement. And so just wanted to say that early on, and just again, thank you for your participation, for all the work you do while we do work at the national level. This really is continuing to be about how we can implement and transform lives through the grassroots all across the country, and hopefully someday all around the world. And so just wanted to share that early on, but really excited about this call. You're going to be put into different breakout rooms, as Whitney will tell us, but this is really going to be led by Jen and Whitney, and then the breakout rooms will be facilitated by the CTIPP team. So you'll be with either me, Jen, Whitney, or Laura. And so really excited about this, looking forward to your feedback and thoughts as we go through. But in terms of our work for the year ahead, or actually the next 2 years ahead, I want to turn it over to Jen to talk about the 118th, and then we'll go from there.
Thanks, Jesse. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see some familiar faces. And for those who don't know me, I'm Jen. I am the Director of Government Affairs at the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice, or CTIPP. And before I turn it over to Whitney to sort of introduce and present on our first of 2 breakout rooms today, I wanted to share just a few policy updates, as I usually do. So let me share my screen. And is this full screen, Jesse?
Yeah, that looks good.
Great, thanks. So the 118th Congress, which is a 2-year session, began January 3rd. So we are a couple weeks into the next session. And what's happening so far in Congress is representatives and leadership are just getting organized. And so they are assigning committee positions, leadership positions, and really figuring out what kind of committees and special committees they want to form and what kind of topics they want to tackle. And so there hasn't been a lot of development legislatively, but there's a lot of formation happening right now. In the House, there was a flip from Democrat to Republican, and so there's a lot of changeover in terms of who's setting the priorities and who's going to be driving different agendas on committees. And so at CTIPP, we're really tracking changes in chairmanship and committee membership so that we can make sure we have the right relationships established with people who are going to be making decisions about the topics that we really care about as part of the Community Advocacy Network or CTIPP CAN. So that's kind of what's happening in Washington, D.C., sort of a lot of organization, but not a ton of policy yet. But I will share a little bit. So the Department of Health and Human Services has started making awards from the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. So you'll recall the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act passed in the summer of last year to address gun violence and mental health. And so a lot of that funding is starting to go out and trickle into some of the programs that we see across different agencies in the federal government, which will then eventually trickle down to state and local agencies, as well as community-based organizations. So we're seeing additional money go into a new program called Resilience in Communities After Stress and Trauma Grants, which is for communities that are healing from recent violence or tragedies or uprisings. We have Project Aware, we have Trauma-Informed Schools grants, National Child Traumatic Stress Initiative. And so this is money that we're sort of tracking where it goes. And it's something where if you're interested in advocating for money for your governor's office or your state or local agencies to make sure they're applying for this kind of money, these are good programs to track, and we're happy to talk a little bit more offline about how to do that, how to advocate for others to apply. But if you are part of or in community with organizations that might want to apply themselves, we also would love to offer you resources in-house and technical assistance, as well as point you in the direction of resources at agencies that can give you tips and teach you sort of how to apply for these federal grants. And so SAMHSA hosted a grant writing webinar earlier today, but these kinds of things happen all the time. So if you're interested in learning how to apply for these types of grants, please do be in touch. And then the other update that I wanted to build off of what we explained last month is our Take on Trauma campaign. So our Take on Trauma campaign is officially launching next Monday. And essentially this is really trying to kick off the 118th Congress with getting members of Congress, legislators, policymakers, to prioritize the issue of trauma. And so we have two parts of this campaign. One is an advocate sign-on letter, which is a short letter that we're going to send to every member of Congress that asks them to prioritize addressing trauma in the 118th Congress and recommend some specific steps they can take as a starting point. So far, we have 607 signatures, which is really great. We're hoping to get to 1,000 by the time it closes on January 31st. There's also an opportunity to leave a comment on why addressing trauma is so important to you. And what we'll do is send those comments to your representatives to further educate them on what their constituents care about and why their constituents care so much about these issues. We've received incredible comments, everything from what people have seen in their professional experience to their lived experience. Really powerful testimony. So you can go to ctipp.org/action to sign, and please also spread the word in your communities to other people who may want to sign that as well. And then the part that I wanted to sort of debut here is part 2 of the campaign, which is a media campaign. And so next Monday, we are launching this campaign with a really exciting asset. We had 5 members of Congress. So we had 2 senators and 3 representatives in the House work with us to create a really incredible 1-minute long video that really compiles all of their insights into one 60-second script on why we really need to take this moment as an opportunity to address trauma. So we're going to unveil that video on Monday, and Laura, our communications director, has also put together an entire toolkit with graphics that people can use with the hashtag Take on Trauma. She has sample social media posts, sample Instagram reels, Twitter pictures, Facebook posts, op-eds, newsletters. And what we're really hoping is that you all and our partners and national organizations and local organizations will really amplify the campaign and this message to build support with policymakers, but also people in every sector to really support this. So you can go to bit.ly/takeontrauma, and it will take you to a Google Drive folder that looks like this on the left, which will have a toolkit guide to introduce you and what everything that's in here, and then example press release, example social media posts, example newsletters, and then all the social media graphics. And then we will upload the major video that I mentioned with the members of Congress in there as well before Monday. And so we'll be amplifying your posts throughout the week next week, but would love just support to uplift and amplify. And I put an example of one of the graphics on the bottom right. So that is my big update and call to action for this month, really hoping folks can spread the word about all of this so we can really kick things off very strong for the 118th Congress. And thank you to everyone who has joined and signed on as well. We really appreciate it. And with that, I will turn it over to Whitney for a presentation, and then we'll start our first breakout room. Thanks.
Hooray. Thank you so much, Jen. Hey, folks, I'm Whitney, and I'm CTIPP's Director of Trauma-Informed Practice and Systems Transformation. And it's wonderful to be with you today to kick off our CTIPP CAN connection points for this new year. And I just want to share that our first breakout discussion today is a bit of a big picture conversation to really encourage discussion around how each of us conceptualizes or thinks about what successful advocacy really takes, means, and looks like, and to invite consideration around how that really aligns with your personal strengths as an advocate at an individual level. And this is partially because, we at CTIPP really recognize that there have been just these enormous achievements in this movement already, and we're just so struck by the momentum of the many organizations and coalitions and collaboratives that we see advancing trauma-informed, resilience-oriented, and healing-centered approaches nationwide, and honestly, even internationally, really. And yet we recognize that these groups are as powerful as they are due to the sustained commitment and capacities of the individuals who really come together to do this work. And so we just think starting the new year by creating space to shine a spotlight on each person's strengths and really strategize together around how to mobilize them can be a really valuable conversation to get us started throughout this year. And I'm just going to share my screen here briefly so you can. I don't have cool graphics. Jen had cool graphics. My apologies. It's just womp womp. It's a Microsoft Word doc. But hopefully it's just a helpful anchor point for you. We would love to discuss these 4 prompts in the breakout rooms. And again, you can see them on the screen. And don't worry, you don't need to jot down notes. You don't need to memorize anything at this stage. One of our CTIPP team members, as was mentioned, will be in the breakout rooms with you, typing notes on a Google Doc while sharing our screens. And this is going to be shared out in sort of the bigger session afterwards. We'll pick someone to report out in our breakout rooms. But this is just the prompts that we'll be looking at in general. And we're hoping just to spend a couple moments before we break out to let you know what to expect and what is expected of you. And so first, we're asking you to just generally consider what being a successful advocate looks like to you. And this is on an individual level, right? So when we're thinking about this, it's really important that it's not just about advancing legislation and getting it signed into law as an indicator of success, right? If we only looked at those longer term, more macro level achievements, we might not notice any of the successes happening on the ground among advocates. And so what we're really really inviting you to think about is, what would a person be doing that from your perspective would indicate that they've been successful in their advocacy efforts? So for someone, for example, it might be making calls to legislators and staffers. Someone else might say engaging with sign-on letters to demonstrate support for a particular policy proposal, like we talked about a few moments ago. It might also be, as simple as forwarding emails and action alerts received, attending relevant meetings like this one we're at together right now, reading and researching to expand your knowledge, or doing direct outreach with community members to get a real sense of what those needs really are. Those are just a few of many examples of what successful advocacy at the individual level might look like in practice, as we're just encouraging you to explore. And from there, with prompt 2, we're inviting you to really zoom in a little bit by thinking about where you would put yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 based on how you just defined successful advocacy. And after thinking about that at a higher level, we're then inviting you to consider what you're already doing or have done to position yourself or groups you're a part of to engage in what you've defined as successful advocacy efforts. So again, maybe you're thinking, okay, well, I joined this coalition, or I did some organizing to build public will. I had a one-on-one meeting to build relationships with policymakers that I think might make great champions, or I volunteered to help support an advocacy or Hill Day. Again, whatever fits for you. These are just a couple of examples. And of course, this will look different. That's the beauty of this group, right? This is going to look different from person to person. There's so much space in this movement for important, impactful work. And just we're so looking forward to hearing what you share. And then the final prompt there really invites consideration around what your next steps might be, what it would take for you to build on what's already in place, what you're already doing, and what's already working to really continue to advance this work. And this is where we're asking you to sort of dig in a little bit deeper and really think about how you can mobilize your unique strengths and leverage your personal skills and capacities and access to resources to really keep that advocacy momentum going. So again, a few examples just to help you start thinking about these things could be, maybe you're a strong communicator who's really inspiring and persuasive, and you could use that skill set and your strengths to generate momentum through storytelling for more public and political will toward trauma-informed change. Maybe you're ultra persistent and determined, and so you're a great candidate maybe to keep showing up to meet with your legislators, maybe even the ones who aren't super clearly aligned with your goals on the surface, to really help them understand common ground that exists and how vital it is to take action to improve health and well-being with trauma-informed approaches. Maybe you're a long-term thinker who can really help keep focus on the big picture, or maybe on the other hand, you're a details person who can help break down those big goals into actionable steps. Maybe you're creative and savvy with tech, and you're somebody who could really help distill and present ideas by making infographics, sharing them on Twitter. Or maybe you're a fabulous researcher, or you have a legal background that you could use to parse dense bills or help recognize areas to more robustly include trauma-informed approaches. Maybe you're a connector. There are so many different roles that you could play. Just naming a few strengths to get your brains going about what we're sort of thinking might be great for us to discuss today. And so it's my best hope that this guidance has gotten your brains, again, just beginning to think about the conversation as you enter breakout rooms, after which, again, just so you're aware, we're going to invite one person from each room to sort of speak to what struck them about the conversation, summarize key points, and if there's time, also, of course, invite open discussion with the larger group for anyone who wants to contribute. And before we dive into those discussions, I'm just going to scroll down here. We want to just take a quick moment to share with you some community agreements our team has co-constructed that we're asking each person here to hold yourself accountable to upholding, as these guidelines really help each of us work and be together to have discussions about taking transformational action as we're doing here today. And so quickly, Everyone is invited to participate while also retaining the right to pass. So you're totally in charge of whether and how you contribute to this conversation, demonstrating respect by giving uninterrupted attention to the person who has the floor at any time. This process is also based on an assumption of equal worth and dignity of all participants. And so we just ask that you create space for others' perspectives and experiences and ideas and contributions, while also really remaining intentional about how we express ourselves and being aware of the impact our language may have regardless of our intentions. Preserving confidentiality and privacy by really ensuring we're not sharing something that isn't our story to tell. Engaging with curiosity and compassion rather than shaming others or making assumptions by really calling people in rather than calling people out, which means allowing each of us to be imperfect works in progress, yet maintaining accountability by really bringing attention to harmful words or behavior if they do arise. And as I like to say, throwing sunshine rather than shade, right? Meaning helping generate understanding, shining a spotlight on what we need to be aware of to really encourage learning and growth. Using inclusive language that's accessible to people with varying levels of knowledge and familiarity with these topics being discussed. You know, one of the great things about this group is that we all may be coming together from really different spots on our journey of becoming trauma-informed and learning about all of this. Taking space and making space by paying attention to how frequently, how long, and how quickly we participate, with the recognition that time is an equity issue, right? And so if there's silence, recognizing that that may be thinking time for folks, not just, you know, breaking the silence to say something, just to say something in a way, and generally just making efforts to create space for all voices to share air equally. Really taking care to claim our opinions and speaking from our own experiences, things like using I statements rather than generalizations. I really like how I've heard this put before as speak from the I, think from the we, and would encourage keeping that frame in mind. And then finally, we encourage you to engage in ongoing self-reflection and take care of yourself in whatever way makes sense for you in this process. So with that, before we move into breakout rooms, again, this is co-constructive. I want to hold space for just a moment to see whether anyone feels that anything else needs to be added here in order to openly and freely participate before we break out. All righty.
Oh, I'd just say congratulations to Laura Quigley for doing such a great job of creating these beautiful materials that you all have got going on.
Absolutely. Snaps for Laura for sure. They're great. Thanks for uplifting that. And on that note, Jesse, are the breakout rooms ready to? No?
The
Okay.
breakout rooms are all set.
Oh, hooray.
And so just so folks know, they're going to automatically put you in there instead of you having to click a button. We will have 30 minutes. You'll see in the top right corner a timer for 29 minutes, and then you'll have 60 seconds before the breakout rooms kick you out. So looking forward to the wisdom and expertise of the group, and we'll all be back in about a half an hour together. Opening the rooms now.
Are the privacy of our conversation, since that, you know, it was something we discussed together, but I am going to turn it over to Carrie to present on some of the key takeaways, some of the things that maybe were most striking and the themes.
Okay, I'll do my best because boy, this was a deep, deep group. Okay, so what does being a successful advocate look like to you on an individual level? Well, one thing that we wanted to clarify that in a group setting, we need to be aligned in what we're advocating for, that alignment with what we're advocating for and how we're advocating versus self-advocacy versus individual advocacy. Self-advocacy being advocating for ourselves and individual for others. And creating a heart space to take all this in and the tools that we need to build so that we can support everybody and not just be sitting at the table, but that we're actively participating. And that begins within, that we really need to know why we're doing what we're doing, and it needs to be coming from our core. So we need to look at how we can tie this back to our world and the people around ourselves, and to get that if you're always advocating with others without considering yourself, you won't be as successful. So, you know, the old fallback idea, we've got to take care of ourselves before we can take care of anybody else. And again, the working from lived experience, and the value of disruption and making good trouble, and unapologetically speaking our truth with finesse, and learning how to live in the space of uncomfortable, to befriend discomfort, and the importance of empathy, communicating and to understand, listening and communicating in a way that we are working to understand others and be understood, even if, and maybe even especially if we don't necessarily agree with everything, but that we advocate because it's the human thing to do, it's the right thing to do. We recognize that the whole will benefit, and the importance of setting aside parts of ourselves as we stand up for others. The importance of approaching this with intentionality and being engaged. And one really wild concept that rang true was, if we were really doing this well, we wouldn't even need to be advocating, that it would just be the norm because everybody's needs were met. And it reminds me of an infographic we did, you know, of what it would be like to be living in a just society. So anything that helps move us toward that and takes the barriers down and makes the process easier and more supportive. So the leaders in the movement need to make sure that the people who need to be at the table are at the table, and maybe we need to pay them to be at the table, and we need to create the space. So maybe it's paying people, having meetings, doing whatever at different times and places that are on public transportation, whatever, I'm adding that in, but that we need to notice the environmental aspects, that what resources and institutional conditions might make it easier for other people to be able to advocate for themselves and individuals. So, you know, is there a difference in how you advocate if you're being paid versus you're not being paid? And mainly just the concept of working to advance equity and justice, and thinking about, are we doing this as an activity, or are we doing this to actually move things along? So we talked a little bit about what was successful, but we're not going to share that out. So what needs to happen for us to move ourselves up just one little step on the scale, the remaining to be committed to not getting caught up in the dailiness of our jobs and remaining anchored to the work, that we need to keep prioritizing ourselves and about how easily we can be burned out, that we need to be seed sowers, that, you know, we may not see what the end result of all this is going to be. We won't see the end result, but just know that for future generations, this is going to be, there will be an outcome for them, that, you know, we won't see the trees, the systems, the institution, and the structures that are made, but that changing the status quo is really hard and takes a long-term work commitment. I mean, we've heard it said this work is generations, but by anchoring it in what we know are our values and directions, we'll move it forward. So did that get it in our group? That I've pretty much captured?
I saw some nods there, Carrie. So
Okay.
Thank you for sharing back.
Oh, thank you, Whitney, for taking such incredible notes. Whoa.
Thank you, group, for being so deeply thoughtful and just so profound and rich in the discussion that we had. And thank you, Carrie, for being courageous, Carrie, to share out in the group.
Thanks so much. I'm going to turn it over to Rachel Miller to report back about the discussion in our group.
So, in discussion, so for the number one, overall, there was a lot of discussion about engaging in the education in different levels, how personal experience comes into play with your personal advocacy. A lot of people advocate because of a personal experience. And then some people don't really acknowledge their trauma of their own personal experiences. So the research is still very important. That a lot of people are surprised in many sectors of how trauma informed, like they have a role in it, you know, in different sectors, not just the medical profession. And going back to the overall thing of education, education for community, some people, education for people in power, like at the state and law enforcement levels. Creating that trauma-informed environment and programs for awareness of different approaches. And main thing was relationships that need to be sustained again across sectors, and long-term engagement, the importance of that. Most of us gave ourselves numbers 5, 6, and 7. You know, so we're all right there in the middle, got room for improvement, but we know where we've been. So the next one down from that, so people thinking and doing, you know, these are things like right now, you're thinking about it and you're taking a step to do something. Another one mentioned reading a book that's relevant to their work and where they want to go in advocacy. So that ties also in with statements of continually learning, sharing, and continuing the research. And real important is to build networks, because alone as individuals we can advocate, but it is really important to be building networks so that you can advocate with others. And the other point, number 4, things we can do to get involved with some advocacy groups, whether that's at the local, state, or national level. A commitment to maybe writing letters and doing more concrete things to take action, not just, you know, talking about it or reading about it, but actually taking that step to do something of action. Speaking to representatives, again, whether that's at local, state, or federal levels. And in order to do that, you have to know of the policy making and know the connections to be able to talk to those elected officials. So learn the positions that your representatives have on issues, and you may be able to talk to one that is kind of in line with what you're looking for to help them along their way in advocating. Final last words of wisdom was believe in yourself and have hope. Anybody in our group have anything to add to that?
Okay. Laura Quigley for group number 4. I'll also be doing the readout. We had a really good discussion that centered on several different themes in no particular order. We talked a lot about leveraging relationships. First, how do you create those relationships, and then how do you leverage them? And so we talked a lot about the various ways that you can do that. You know, leaning on your staff, your supporters, your board, your sort of first ring circle around your organization, who may have personal relationships that you can leverage with policymakers and elected officials. You know, opening up for folks that have actual buildings and things happening in those buildings, opening up your doors and hosting a day where policymakers and electeds can come in and actually see and touch and feel what you're doing. Leveraging or creating milestone moments. So, May is Mental Health Month. Someone discussed, that they're going to host an ACEs Aware Day as a way to try to get folks in the elected officials engaged. We also talked a little bit about statewide lobby days for states that still do that. And so that also, we discussed a lot about how it's so important to do homework and research before you even initiate new relationships, particularly with new members. So every time there's like a new class of new members, really doing a deep dive into those folks to figure out if there's any just, good like-minded partners or things that they've supported in other capacities that might be a good fit in the trauma-informed space, is again, creating entree points into the conversation. And then once you've got them, then how do you keep them engaged, moving forward? We talked a lot about how, looking at the really local level at what are the communities and what are the challenges that exist in your community, and sort of peeling back the curtain to figure out like, well, what actually caused it, right? Am I looking at the symptom or am I looking at the cause? And really taking, someone said it was just like community organizing, right? Really taking a community organizing approach to, okay, we've got a problem. How are we going to solve it? Who are the right people in the room? Cold calling if needing to, but again, like figuring out who needs to be in the room to help solve that problem. And then leveraging your relationships to make that happen by making introductions to those people, getting materials, videos, fact sheets, educational materials in front of those folks to get them engaged. And then let me see if there's anything else. Oh, and then another good comment too was, they were all great comments. But one I wanted to highlight as well was, really remembering that as you're sitting and talking to folks about trauma-informed anything policy practice, also remembering that the folks you might be speaking with might have and probably have encountered trauma in some form in their life directly, and just making sure to model the model and that your approach itself in discussing these issues is trauma-informed. And then anyone from my group, if you want to chime in on anything I forgot, please do so. But those are the highlights.
Thank you to all of the groups. Such incredible, enriching discussion, which is what we were hoping for. And so really appreciate your participation and the connection. We're really excited to continue the conversation. We had planned a second breakout room, but we're going to move into Jen. We'll share some messaging guidelines, and then we were planning on co-creating elevator speeches, which we may do at some point in the future. But Jen, if you want to share, and then we can put the prompt up and maybe folks can just spend a few minutes typing theirs after your presentation and then share in the chat as a way to end the call. That would be great.
Thanks. Yeah, that was a really wonderful exercise, and I want to thank Whitney for sort of putting that together. To transition topics slightly, one of the things that came up in almost every breakout room was the goal around continuing to educate and talk to people in many sectors about the issue of trauma. And one of the things that we're really trying to be intentional about is giving you all the tools and reflecting ourselves at CTIPP and as a community about how we talk about trauma, how we talk about this issue. And so last month, we sort of got together in breakout rooms and talked about what are some of the challenges that we have in communicating about trauma, especially to people who don't have a basic understanding of what we're talking about, as well as how to communicate about trauma in a way that is persuasive. And so we have these barriers for both, people who don't understand the issues that we're talking about, are sort of new to the topic of trauma and resilience. And also in the policy space, we have people across the political spectrum that we have to figure out how to develop a message that works for everyone, regardless of how they're approaching this work and where they're coming from. And so I want to spend a little bit of time recapping the presentation from last month from Iowa ACES 360. This is a group in Iowa who's part of our network, who developed some general guidelines on talking points that they use when they're talking to people about the issue of trauma. And the exercise that we want to challenge everyone to engage in today, and we were going to do breakout rooms, but I suggested to Jesse, let's just have people listen to my presentation and then come up with these elevator pitches yourselves. And then if you want, put them in the chat and I can read some of them out loud, because we only have about 15 minutes left. And so based on some of the recommendations I'm about to recap in the next few slides, develop an elevator pitch, which is like 30-second pitch on why there's a need to address trauma or on the need to address trauma. And so just repurposing some of Iowa ACE 360's slides, they grounded us in this why we need this shared messaging, which is to combat unhelpful frames. So there are some unhelpful ways that people are talking about trauma or thinking about our issue. Some of them are thinking that kids are the sole responsibility of the family rather than of the community and of these greater systems around them. This emphasis on individualism, that trauma is something an individual experiences, an individual needs to heal from, that good parenting comes naturally, that good parenting is a choice, that public assistance should be temporary, an us versus them narrative. They experience trauma, removing the us from those experiences, classifying people as deserving versus undeserving of resources and help, and this message that problems are just too great to be solved. So these are some of the frames that are not as convincing and accessible when we're trying to bring people into our movement and get people bought in and supporting what we're trying to do. And so what they found as effective frames are to instead focus on people as people, humanize the issue, to draw attention to addressing conditions around the person, not the individual. So what are the conditions that people need to heal rather than focusing on their responsibility? Highlight what is possible, emphasize that there are solutions, connect the dots, and find ways to help people relate in and empathize and feel supportive and understand, and then give a clear call to action, a clear deliverable or request. And so when we frame our messages with these things in mind, we can move into a more effective messaging. And here are just some of their examples of the way that they use these frames and integrate it into some of their statements. And Iowa ACES 360 does a lot of work with policymakers in the state. It's a very big mix of Dem and Republican. And so they use this a lot when they're trying to advocate for policy change. And some examples are, when families are healthy and well, that's a positive strengths-based frame. Children can learn and grow, caregivers can fully contribute, and Iowa's economy and communities can prosper. So that's very hope, positive, strengths-based frame about the community and the state at large. Policies can remove barriers and create pathways, shaping the conditions that impact families' ability to thrive. Families especially need access to supportive connections and essential needs, including quality housing options, health and mental health care, and robust public schools. These are some of the specific solutions they're laying out, as well as giving this narrative that what we need to do is remove barriers to the American dream, right? And if only we could remove these barriers, people can succeed and become the kind of parents and families they want to be. Talking about these community conditions enable caregivers, focusing on the community conditions rather than the blame on the parents or the families. And then finally, Iowans are facing tremendous stress and adversity. intentionally making policy decisions, that's the call to action, that promote positive conditions for families will lessen the long-term impact of the pandemic on our state and lead to a robust workforce, growing communities, and a better future for our kids. That's kind of connecting the dots to what could happen. And so that's sort of my short summary of the big takeaways for how we at CTIPP are trying to move forward and adopt these effective frames in our messaging and our persuasion. So I encourage folks maybe take a few minutes and draft for yourself 2 or 3 sentences of if you were to run into someone at a networking event, or you were to meet with a staffer of your elected official, and you wanted to just very briefly introduce them to this issue and just say, trauma is so important because, and just sort of bring them into the fold. What would you say? How would you use these frames to create that call to action, highlight the positive, the solutions, focus on that strength-based frame? I'll leave this up here. And then I really encourage folks to put some thoughts in the chat. And I can try and read those out for everyone.
So we'll give some time for thought here, I think, just a few minutes as you come up with, how the messaging fits in your own mind.
So I was brainstorming an example, and I'll start with mine, and then Shoni has one as well. I said, caregivers want children to have good lives. Policymakers can create community conditions that allow caregivers the freedom to give children support, help, and a good future. Trauma is important because it is a silent, unheard voice that screams aloud in many souls. I would like to talk to you about ways to continue to build safe spaces for the souls of man to be heard, seen, and understood. Another example, earlier in my advocacy, I was overt. Sorry, this is just a reflection. Thank you for this reflection. Earlier in my advocacy, I was overt and challenging in my messaging. This neutral strategy is critical as there are those who won't or don't want to be part of advocacy, either because it's considered a private family matter, their own denial, or the other side of the abuse experience.
Hi.
Another example, kids who experience trauma and adversity in their homes and communities may, as a result, be less healthy and successful in school as they grow. To make our state or community stronger, we need to create positive conditions for families and communities so they can thrive. That means safe and affordable housing, economic stability, and accessible healthcare. It means mentoring for kids and community resources that engage young people. We can make this happen together. Another example, we believe that every child should have the opportunity to grow in a safe, healthy, and nurturing environment. We can better achieve that if we prevent trauma through a trauma-informed approach in schools. We must provide empathy, resources, and solutions for those who have been exposed to multiple forms of trauma for their mental and physical well-being. Thank you.
Can I say something?
Julia, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi. One thing that I learned throughout my long career, I'm now retired from APA, is that, we needed to know first what are the politicians' ideas, goals, and what is important for them. We need, whatever we come to them, we need first to know very well what kind of things he or she wants. And then model our conversation and our issues to fulfill what they want. Because, you know, it's very rare to have a meeting or to talk to them. They are always so busy. And, you know, everything is like very fast. So in my whole life, what worked is you need first to establish a relationship with them. Like you know, you are just there providing things to them, making sure that they trust you. And then a couple months later or a couple weeks later, you come with something that you want. It's you know, it's like a dance that you needed to get involved when you are dealing with politicians. And they have their big lists, big funders, and big interests. So it's very important that we go and listen to them and then try to engage them in something that you've known. I mean, it's always very important to do a very, very good, you know, homework about them and what kind of person, what kind of issues, and what have they done, you know. This is so important. You never go to talk to them unprepared. It's not going to work. You need to be very prepared.
Thank you, Julia.
With them.
I'm mindful of time because we're at time, but it was a perfect way to end, Julia. Next month, we're going to talk a lot more in detail about tips, starting with some of those very points about how to get ready to have these kinds of conversations. So we wanted to do this exercise to get people thinking about how to be intentional about the way we're communicating. But that's a great tee up for next month because we will be providing even more tips on how to manage that dance and how to have these conversations. So thank you. And thanks everyone for who put their prompts in the chat that I wasn't able to get to. Really appreciate it. And thanks to the whole team. It's great to see everyone.
Yeah. Thank you all for a wonderful call, for your engagement throughout and the ongoing reflection. We look forward to continuing to build strength as a network. Like Jen said, we're really looking forward to next month's CTIPP CAN call, when we'll be diving a little bit deeper, as well as there will be a presentation on trauma-informed care for students with learning differences as well. In the meantime, if you're interested, Whitney pulled together a tremendous advocacy series that lives on our website. And so if you're interested in continuing to learn and engage, there's a 9-part asynchronous advocacy series with opportunities for self-reflection ongoing that I just put in the chat. Feel free to use that, share that, learn, and we really look forward to seeing you all next month. Thank you again for your engagement, participation, always for your support. We look forward to continuing to build this movement together and moving toward a wonderful 118th Congress and beyond. Have a great month, everyone. Be well.
Thank you.